Culture wars. They're everywhere right now. The right wing screaming about the woke as if liberal culture is the only real problem in the world right now, and the left wing throwing the word fascist around as if it meant simply a state of mind. Well, for better or worse, we are not the only ones with culture wars. They've been around for a while. On the 30th of June, 1937, Joseph Goebbels, the Reich Minister for Propaganda and Enlightenment, what a title, authorized the director of the Reich Chamber for Culture, Adolf Ziegler, to select and confiscate paintings and sculptures from public collections for a major exhibition on degenerate art. Ziegler said, quote, "What's been gathered together in this exhibition constitutes the portrayal of a true witch's sabbath and the most frivolous, spiritual, artistic, cultural bolshevism, and a portrayal of the triumph of subhumanity, of arrogant Jewish insolence, and total spiritual senile dementia." Wow, that's intense. Okay, welcome to the Weimar Spectacle, where I explore the brief and extraordinary life of the Weimar Republic. I am Bremner Fletcher Duthie, singer, actor, and theater maker. I have spent years and years and years and years and so many years performing songs in theater from the Weimar period, and I am inspired and maybe, I admit it, maybe more than a little obsessed by that moment in time. This episode is all about art and culture, and I will put, there's some incredible images, and I will put them all onto the website on the blog page, bremnersings.com, BREMNERSINGS.com. So, as you know, my big absurd idea for these podcasts is that the Weimar Republic invented absolutely everything about the modern world, and we mortals are still dealing with the possibilities and problems it gave to us. And to prove this probably completely unprovable idea, I will be exploring the arts, politics, science, architecture, social innovations of the Weimar period, and of course, the terrible and irresistible rise of the Nazi Party. So, if you are a struggling artist wondering if watercolors or oil painting is a safer choice under a fascist regime, or maybe you are a simple art lover who is incensed that your local gallery has bought an abstract painting for real money and you're wondering what to do about it, well, this is the show for you. So, the Entartete Kunst exhibition takes place in 1937, long after the Weimar Republic is dead and gone. But I'm going to put it in this podcast since essentially the works inside the exhibition are the culmination of the Weimar arts movement. And I find it fascinating and terrifying that 4 years after their total victory in Germany, and at this point the Nazis still find it necessary to continue beating the drum against what they call modern decadent, degenerate culture. I mean, at this point, they have control over most of the institutions of German life. They're in power. However, they still find it invaluable to their program to scream about culture wars and make that one of the main platforms of their ideology. And tragically, at this point, the Nazis are developing one of their first experiments in racial purity, which is horrifyingly the sterilization and euthanasia of physically and mentally disabled Germans, a program in which they eventually kill hundreds of thousands of helpless people, many of them children. Oh, and one can see how this continued focus on degeneracy and its elimination is just one more way to give their hideous efforts more legitimacy. Now, as with so many other madnesses of the Nazi ideology, they insisted that they had scientific backing for these claims. A 19th century critic and author, Max Nordau, had written a book called Degeneration, where he said, quote, "Degenerates are not always criminals, prostitutes, anarchists, and pronounced lunatics. They are often authors and artists, and idiotic sequences of words are psychologically interesting, for they demonstrate with instructive significance the workings of a shattered brain." Max Nordau, based his ideas upon the writings of a criminologist, Cesare Lombroso, whose work, The Criminal Mind, tried to prove that there are born criminals who could be detected by measuring abnormal physical characteristics. Nordau took this and applied it to modern art, which he described as the work of those so corrupted by the stress and problems of modern life they have lost the self-control needed to produce coherent works. And he made that a vast generalization. He described modern English literature, Richard Wagner, and modern French literature as the product of mental disease, and called Impressionism the sign of a diseased visual cortex. And despite the fact that Nordau was Jewish, his theory of artistic degeneracy would be seized upon by German Nazis during the Weimar Republic and afterwards as a rallying point for their racist demand for Aryan purity in art. And degenerate came to be used as a concept for modern culture that, in Hitler's words, manifested symptoms of national decline. Another scientific backer of the idea of degeneracy was the Militant League for German Culture, founded in 1928 by Nazi ideologue Alfred Rosenberg. In 1930, they arranged a major youth conference to present the new Nazi leaders, among them Goebbels and Goering, and a resolution called for resistance against all populist, harmful influences in the area of theater, literature, and fine arts, and against alien architecture. Not sure what alien architecture is, but they didn't like it. And they presented lectures like Blood and Honor and Race and Personality. And Goering spoke on the theme of readiness to fight to protect our culture. Also in 1928, Paul Schulz-Naumburg, an architect and again a Nazi activist, published his book Kunst und Raus, Art and Race, which applied racial science to art. Racial science in large quotation marks, claiming a connection between artistic expression and mental or physical disabilities, both of which were supposed to be eradicated from the racial community. And according to him, artworks mirrored the racial quality of the artists themselves. And so artists considered racially healthy would produce art that improved the German race. And artists with mental or physical, quotation mark, defects produced art that mirrored their, quotation marks, racial deficiencies. Schulz-Naumburg put photographs of disabled, and this is just so tragic and horrible. He would take these pictures of severely disabled people, physically and mentally disabled, and try and find modernist art that resembled these tragically disabled people. Sort of a completely brutal, unsympathetic use of somebody's disabilities in order to prove his talking point. However, much to the dismay of all these quotation mark scientists, I'm going to stop with the quotation marks because I'm just going to be doing it all the way through here. So please take any completely questionable statement or word that I say as obviously in quotation marks. So much to the dismay of all these scientists, under the Weimar government of the 1920s, Germany emerged as a leading center of the avant-garde and one of the major centers of modern art in Europe. There was the radical work of the two art movements, Die Brücke and Der Blaue Reiter, then a further renaissance that affected culture in all its aspects as a new approach to design flourished at Bauhaus, jazz bands, and cabaret became popular, and expressionism went from being simply a painting, a theory of painting to bleed into architecture, literature, theater, dance, and the new cinema, where it created masterpieces like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu, and not to mention the atonal music compositions of Arnold Schoenberg and the jazz-influenced work of Paul Hindemith and Kurt Weill. However, this golden period was not going to last. In 1930, Wilhelm Frick, Nazi interior and cultural minister of one of the provinces of Germany, dismissed all practitioners of the Bauhaus design style. Frick ordered artworks by, quote, there we go again, by degenerate artists to be removed from the Schloss Museum in Weimar. and then he listed his enemies. And okay, this is a moment where we can at least smile bitterly about these choices of enemies, since today reading the list gives us a pantheon of influential artists respected by history. But those most hated by that Nazi culture minister were people like Kurt Tucholsky, Thomas Mann, Bertolt Brecht, Walter Mehring, Kandinsky, Kurt Schwitters, the whole Bauhaus movement. Max Beckmann, George Gross, Otto Dix, Kandinsky, Paul Klee, Stravinsky, Hindemith, Kurt Weill. And also books by Erich Maria Remarque, All Quiet on the Western Front, and films by Eisenstein and Pabst. They were all dismissed as not properly German. And finally, Hitler's rise to power on the 30th of January 1933, legally elected, was immediately followed by the censorship of modern art in all its forms. Theaters were closed, artists arrested and sent for re-education. Book burnings were organized. In September 1933, Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda — I love putting those two together, Public Enlightenment and Propaganda — was put in charge of the Reich Culture Chamber. The Reich Culture Chamber was a set of subchambers within the larger culture chamber, each subchamber representing music, film, literature, architecture, and visual arts. And in each of those, the only people allowed to practice were those who were racially pure. Goebbels said, quote, "In the future, only those who are members of a chamber are allowed to be productive in our cultural life. Membership is open only to those who fulfill the entrance condition. In this way, all unwanted and damaging elements have been excluded." And by 1935, the Reich Culture Chamber had 100,000 artist members who accepted participation in this Nazi belief system. However, all fake scientific rationalism aside, it was ultimately Hitler who decided the artistic taste of the Third Reich. He gave his personal taste in art the force of law. Ironically, the only other state that took such an effort to control art was Stalin's Soviet Union, and it was despised by Hitler. Hitler, for his model, took classical Greek and Roman art, since he believed that form embodied an inner racial ideal. Henry Grosshans, author of a book, Hitler and the Artists, says that Hitler saw Greek and Roman art as uncontaminated by Jewish influences. Modern art was seen as an act of aesthetic violence by the Jews against the German spirit. Such was true to Hitler, even though only several artists, Liebermann, Meidner, Freundlich, Chagall, were among those who made significant contributions to the German modernist movement and were Jewish. But still, Hitler took upon himself the responsibility of deciding who, in matters of culture, thought and acted like a Jew. So once again, we see how important this artistic theory of degeneracy was, since the Nazi drive to control the culture overlaps perfectly with their anti-Semitism and a need to eradicate any degeneracy from society. And this could be done by burning a troublesome painting that had been scientifically proven to be degenerate, or by killing a troublesome human for the same reason. So, 30th of January 1937, Goebbels authorizes the director of the Reich Chamber for Culture, Adolf Ziegler, to select and confiscate paintings and sculptures from public collections for a major exhibition on degenerate art. A Nazi book, Die Sauberung des Kunsttempels, the cleansing of the temples of art, provided the blueprint. It called for a cleansing of all of these museums and provided a list of names of artists deemed guilty of promoting degeneracy according to a criteria of decadence, weakness of character, mental disease, and, of course, racial impurity. The commission combed through 32 collections in 23 cities to select works of art. They confiscated over 5,000 pieces, of which 600 were included in the art exhibition. These were shipped to Munich, the capital city of the Nazi movement, and the official city of German art. So, the Entartete Kunst exhibition opens on July 19th, 1937. Ziegler, head of the commission, says, quote, Look around you at these monstrosities of insanity, insolence, incompetence, and degeneration." End quote. It was held in the Institute of Archaeology, deliberately because of its dark rooms and narrow corridors, literally hoping to cast the worst light on these pieces of art. And it remained on view until the 30th of November of that year. So all throughout the summer and into the fall, before traveling to 11 other cities in Germany and Austria. Viewers had to reach the exhibit by means of a narrow staircase. The rooms were made of temporary partitions, deliberately chaotic and overfilled, with pictures crowded together, sometimes unframed, sometimes hung by just a rope. The first sculpture was an oversized portrait of Jesus, purposely forcing viewers to literally bump past it to get into the exhibit. The whole exhibit was meticulously designed to degrade the artwork, accompanied by derogatory labels and slogans to incite the public's hatred. All forms of modernism were covered, from Impressionism to Expressionism, and juxtaposed with works by patients from mental institutions. There were works by, and again, bitter smiles of tragic victory, because these are all incredible artists: Max Beckmann, Marc Chagall, Henri Matisse, Pablo Picasso, Vincent van Gogh, Clay Kandinsky, Piet Mondrian, Salvador Dali. And the first three rooms are grouped thematically. The first room contains works considered demeaning of religion. The second featured works by Jewish artists. And the third contained works deemed insulting to German women, soldiers, and farmers. Slogans were painted on the wall. I'll read a few of them. Revelation of the Jewish racial soul. An insult to German womanhood. The Jewish longing for the wilderness reveals itself. The Negro has become the racial ideal of a degenerate art. Madness becomes method. Nature as seen by sick minds. Madness becomes method. That's actually not a bad quote, but I don't think they meant it in any complimentary way. There is actually some footage of the exhibition. It was shot by an American cinematographer, Julian Bryan. I will put the link on the website on the blog. It's an incredible short moment of people stumbling around through this exhibition. Julian Bryan later states, quote, "People might not believe my story if I had told it in words when I returned to America. However, everyone would believe my movie." The day before the Degenerate Art exhibition opened its doors to the public, Hitler was in Munich. Hitler opens the German art exhibition at the monumental Haus der Deutschen Kunst, the House of German Art. And I'm going to put pictures on the website of the insane parade that greets him and his limousine as he drives to make this speech. It's complete madness. Oh my God. Teutonic ideals gone on acid. You have to see it. Talk about degenerate. The parade is insane, completely insane. So I'm going to read a long quote from the speech he makes at the opening of this huge art exhibition of the finest of German art. And it's very strange to be reading a long quote by Adolf Hitler, but I'm going to read it because so many of the phrases seem both terrifying and incredibly contemporary. So here we go. Adolf. Quote, "When, 4 years ago, the ceremonial cornerstone laying for this building took place, we were all aware that it was imperative to lay not only the cornerstone for a new building, but also the foundation for a new and genuinely German art. The goal was to bring about a turning point in the development of all German cultural creation. The collapse and overall decline of Germany was, as we know, not only academic or political, but rather, and perhaps to a far greater extent, cultural. Moreover, this process was also not solely attributable to the fact of the lost war. Such catastrophes have often afflicted people and states, and these events have not infrequently provided an impetus for their cleansing and with it their inner elevation, but the flood of slime and refuse which the year 1918 at the end of the war spewed into the surface of our lives, was not produced by the loss of the war, but instead released by it. It was only through the defeat that such a thoroughly rotten body first experienced the full extent of its inner decay. During the long years of planning for the new Reich and thus for its intellectual creating and shaping, I have often devoted myself to the tasks that the rebirth of the nation would impose on us, especially in the area of its cultural purification. After all, Germany was to arise again, not only politically and economically, but above all, also culturally. Indeed, I was and am convinced that this last aspect will take on much greater importance for the future than the first two. But you will also understand now that it is not enough to give to German art this new art museum, which is so respectable, clear, and truthful that we may rightly call it a house of German art. Rather, the exhibit itself must also bring about a turning away from the degeneracy that we have witnessed in the arts. Sculpture and painting, Cubism, Dadaism, Futurism, Impressionism have nothing to do with our German people, for all these terms are neither old nor modern, but simply the stilted stammering of people to whom God has denied real artistic talent and given instead the gift of blather and deception. I therefore wish to affirm in this hour my immutable resolve to do for German artistic life what I have done in the area of political confusion, to purge it of empty phrases, works of art that cannot be understood on their own, but rather require a pompous user manual to justify their existence in order to finally find that intimidated person who will patiently accept such foolish or impudent nonsense. Such works will no longer find their way to the German people. The new age of today is working on a new type of man. Immense efforts are being made in countless spheres of life in order to lift up the people, to render our men, boys, and youngsters, girls and women healthier, and thus stronger and more beautiful. Out of this strength and this beauty emanates a new feeling of life, a new joy of life. Never before has humanity been closer to classical antiquity in its appearance and sensibility than it is today. End quote. Wow. Completely terrifying. And insanely familiar. Instead of paintings denouncing the senseless nature of the war or questioning changes in society or working on new ideas about the way society is working and trying to reflect that back to the people, what you found inside this new hall, this temple of German art, were paintings about comradeship, heroism, and motherhood, and service to the Reich, and so many landscapes. And ironically, this official Nazi art is an exact mirror image of the socialist realism of the hated communists. And also, very ironically, at the end of 4 months, Entartete Kunst, the Degenerate Art exhibit, had attracted over 2 million visitors, nearly 3.5 times the number that visited the nearby Große Deutsche Kunstausstellung. The work of clearing out the German museums continued during the exhibition. By the end, around 16,500 works of art were removed on ideological reasons. Nazi officials took many for their private use, very hypocritically. Hermann Goering took 14 valuable pieces, including a Van Gogh and a Cézanne. Then the works that couldn't be shown that they thought had value were sold abroad to generate cold, hard cash for the Nazi regime. Some were sold at auction in Switzerland in 1939. Others were disposed of through private dealers in London and New York. And finally, artworks which could not be liquidated in this manner were destroyed. And in March 1939, the Berlin Fire Brigade burnt about 4,000 paintings, drawings, and prints that they thought had no value. And as Heinrich Heine, the German Romantic poet, once poignantly remarked, "Wherever they burn books, they will in the end burn human beings too." So at the same time as looking at the expression of the art, let's look at the persecution of the artists who created them. I'm going to screw up this pronunciation, but let me do my best. Elfriede Lohse Wichtler. Elfriede Löse Wächtler. Absolutely beautiful work, self-portraits and these gorgeous, expressionistic, beautiful pieces. I'll put one on the website. She suffered a nervous breakdown in 1929 and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, where she continued to make drawings and paint watercolors. In 1932, doctors in the psychiatric hospital diagnosed her with schizophrenia, and according to the Nazi ideology and their wish to purify the race, 2 years later she was forcibly sterilized, and then finally, as that program continued, she was gassed in her own nursing home. Other artists: Max Beckmann, he fled to Amsterdam on the opening day of the Entartete Kunst exhibit. Max Ernst emigrated to America. Paul Klee spent his years of exile in Switzerland, but had been branded a degenerate and was unable to work. A leading German art dealer, the Jewish dealer Alfred Flechtheim, died penniless in exile in London. The cabaret artist Fritz Grünbaum was turned away at the border when he tried to leave Austria and was sent to Buchenwald and later to Dachau. The songwriter Fritz Lohner-Beda, who collaborated on operas with Franz Lehar, spent time in Dachau and Buchenwald before finally being sent to Auschwitz, where he was beaten to death. A writer of hit songs, Ralph Erwin, left Germany in 1933 but was captured in France and died in an internment camp. And those who remained in Germany in internal exile were subject to surprise raids by the Gestapo to ensure that they were not violating the ban on producing artwork. Otto Dix was dismissed from his post as a professor in Dresden in 1933. Two painters, Edgar Ende and Emil Nolde, were forbidden from purchasing painting materials, although absolutely gorgeous, Nolde began secretly using only watercolors to avoid the odor of oil paint. I will put one of the beautiful pieces that he created on the site. So the impact of the Entartete Kunst exhibition was far-reaching. However, perhaps it did not actually have the result that the Nazis desired. Yes, the artistic careers and lives of so many artists were damaged or destroyed. Their contributions to society were marginalized and mocked. However, the exhibition lasted 4 months in Munich and then went on to tour the country. And though it was created with the deliberate intention of triggering negative reactions, nevertheless, lines went around the block in every city. In Munich alone, it attracted more than 2 million visitors, an average of 20,000 people per day, making it arguably the most popular modern art show of all time. And sure, people came for scandal, others in hatred, but I think many realized it could be their last chance to see masterpieces. And ironically, the Degenerate Art exhibition hugely outnumbered the great German art show attendance, receiving, as I said, almost 4 times the number of visitors. Unintentionally, Hitler, despite all his harsh slogans, the way he manipulated the media, the way he tried to shut down and destroy whole cultural movement, still he did more to expose people to the breadth of modernism than anyone before him. So once again, if some of the concerns and desires in these stories seem familiar, well, they should, because I believe the Weimar Republic helped give birth to the modern world. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to hit subscribe on whatever particular podcast platform you're on, or follow, or whatever the hell they're calling it, that will tell you when the new episode appears. I have sworn this year to put them out more regularly. I don't have any advertising budget for this show, really a budget at all. I am literally standing in a cupboard surrounded by clothes with an old microphone. That's how much budget I have. So if you leave a review on your app or you hit a star button, hopefully 5 stars, it encourages the podcast to be found by other listeners, and that would be cool for more people to hear this history. So I hope you will join me in the coming months as I explore more about the strange birth, life, and death of an experiment in creating a new society. I was going to do an episode on the follow-up exhibition to the Entartete Kunst exhibition, which was the Entartete Musik, where the Nazis tried to expose the same degeneracy in Weimar music. But After this one, I need a break from the Nazis, so I'm going to save it for later in the season. That is one of the problems about thinking about the Weimar Republic. No matter how you play it out, it always ends with the Nazis. Well, screw the Nazis. My next episode will be all about the amazing social innovations of the Weimar Republic and how much they have added to our modern life. I will put images for this episode onto my website. The pictures, the drawings are incredible. It's bremnersings.com, BREMNERSINGS.com. There'll be paintings and sculptures from the so-called Degenerate artists, pictures of the exhibition. There's some incredible pictures of Goering and Hitler touring the exhibition, which just makes your brain explode. And pictures of the various cast of characters, the people who created the idea of degenerate people and degenerate art, and of the need to remove them from society in order to have some kind of cultural purification. And who am I to discuss the Weimar Republic? Well, I am not a sociologist. I am not a political scientist. I am no historian. I am an obsessive artist. I am a singer, a playwright, a cabaret performer who's been obsessed with the arts and the music and just the idea of the Weimar arts in the Republic all my life. I've recorded 3 albums dedicated to the music of this time. If you want to go stream them somewhere, that would be great, because then I'll make a penny from a million streams. But it's great to know that they're out there being listened to. The 3 albums are dedicated to the music of the time, particularly the music of Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht. Just search for Bremner, Fletcher, Duthie in any music streaming site. You'll find all my albums. And if you want to know more about my work, my theater shows, my cabaret, see the image from this period, or suggest a specific Weimar subject for an episode, check out bremnersings.com and drop me a line. And I hope you'll join me next time for another walk through the amazing creative madness of 1920s Germany. Thank you.